Now, Boris Johnson has rubbish claims that he's lost his mojo and says the Conservatives will ensure the country will come back stronger after coronavirus. It follows speculation he might not lead the party into the next general election. But during a speech at this year's Conservative Party conference, he said that those suggestions were nonsense.
I've read a lot of nonsense recently about how my own bout of COVID has somehow robbed me of my mojo. And of course, this is self-evident drivel, the kind of seditious propaganda that you would expect from people who don't want this government to succeed, who wanted to stop us delivering Brexit and all our other manifesto pledges. And I can tell you that no power on earth was and is going to do that. And I could refute these critics of my athletic abilities in any way they want. Arm wrestling, leg wrestling, Cumberland wrestling, sprint off, you name it. And yet, I have to admit, the reason I had such a nasty experience with the disease is that although I was superficially in the pink of health when I caught it, I had a very common underlying condition. My friends, I was too fat. And I've since lost 26 pounds, and you can imagine that in bags of sugar. And I'm going to continue that diet because you've got to search for the hero inside yourself in the hope that that individual is considerably slimmer.
Letting slip, he's a bit of an M People fan there, Boris Johnson. Let's get some reaction. I'm now joined by Kulveer Ranger, a former advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London, and also Sonia Sodha, the chief leader writer at The Observer and former senior policy advisor to Ed Miliband. Kulveer, to you first of all, was this vintage Boris? I mean, it's hard for him to speak. It's hard for anybody to make a speech like this when you haven't got an audience to bounce back from.
Yeah, hugely challenging. But, you know, I think what it demonstrated is that this is a fighting fit Prime Minister, leader of the Conservative Party, wanting to get that message out to people that he is recovered, he is in charge, he has a vision. And it was a well-crafted speech. And I've spent many a time locked in a room with Boris as he prepared these speeches. And believe you me, he does personally prepare his speeches. And so listening to him, I could tell this was authentic him. And yes, it had the lightheartedness that is a hallmark of Boris Johnson, but it also went through the serious challenges that the country is facing. And yes, the here and now, COVID, but also setting a vision, because people do want that. They want to see what is it that we will be doing in the months and years ahead as we live in a post-COVID world. And I think that's what Boris tackled today. He set out that vision. The Building Back Better message is clear, but adding meat to that in terms of how, what, where, when, as well as looking at many other topics around home building, safety and security, the NHS. But I think strong messaging, clear policies, a vision for the future, and a fighting fit Boris Johnson.
OK, so that's what was in it. Sonia, what was missing from it? There wasn't a great deal about Brexit, was there? Was there anything in there that you'd have liked the Prime Minister to flesh out more?
Well, there was lots that I think the Prime Minister should have addressed in this speech. To me, it struck a slightly odd tone. It was trying to be really optimistic and positive about the future, but in quite a vague way, actually. And it felt like a speech that had been written earlier on in the summer, before we knew for certain there was going to be a second wave, and that maybe the Prime Minister's advisors just kind of hadn't sort of rethought the speech in light of everything that's going on. So there was a lot that was missing from it. First of all, there was very little about the government's handling of this pandemic, very little acknowledgement of the major mistakes that the government has made. That was just all ignored and swept under the carpet. The fact that, you know, lots of people have not been able to get tested, this huge data error with track and trace, which means that thousands of people that should have been contacted by the test and trace system have not been done so. So there was little about that. There was very little about Brexit and how the government is going to make a success of Brexit. It was just the standard sort of lines. It's all going to be great in 2030. The problem is that the Prime Minister isn't necessarily going to be judged on what the country's like in 2030. He's going to be judged on what it's like in 4 years when there's another election. And then there were other kind of issues that were missing as well. For example, we know that the future of the Union is going to be a huge issue in the sort of 4 or 5 years to come. Support has been growing for Scottish independence, partly because of the government's terrible handling of this pandemic and the fact that many Scots contrast that to Nicola Sturgeon's approach, and he had very little to say about how he was going to protect the future of the Union, for example. So I think it was a speech that struck an odd tone, that didn't really speak to the thousands of people and businesses. Economic forecasts suggest that over 1 million people will be losing their jobs in the months to come. There's very little support from them, from the government. The furlough scheme is coming to an end. Its replacement is very, very marginal compared to the furlough scheme that it was replacing. And, if you're somebody who's scared about losing your job in the next couple of months, and you think that you're going to be in that 1.5 million people who are going to lose your job, sort of hearing the Prime Minister talk about in 10 years' time, we've got this great vision for green power. Well, that's important if you've got concrete policies to illustrate that you can get there. But it doesn't say much to you if you think you're going to lose your job in 2 or 3 months. A 10-year vision for green power doesn't help you get a new job in the here and now. So I think the speech will kind of miss the mark with people who are really kind of quite scared and worried about their sort of economic future going forwards.
Well, let's bring Kulveer back in. I mean, this idea of talking about Britain in 2030, I mean, will Boris Johnson be the man that takes the Conservative Party to the next election, let alone still be here in 10 years' time?
I think the next election is quite a few years off at the moment, but I think the key thing here is that this is a leader's speech to the Conservative Party membership as much as broader than that. And even though there was no audience and a very strange way of delivering it in terms of the virtual platform, the Prime Minister is speaking, and actually it's his first speech since winning a landslide election. He acknowledged that. It's his speech to set out a vision for him being Prime Minister. I don't think, Sonia's point that this speech could have been written months ago, virtually impossible. This speech is for the here and now, but what he needed here and now was to establish a vision for him as Prime Minister. Yes, he's tackling Brexit, and he obviously has got part of that over the line. There's now the trade agreements being negotiated. But the pandemic, a global pandemic, and people are conscious of what is Britain's place in the future, in the new economy, the new world economy that's going to emerge. How are we going to tackle the economic challenges? Where do we want to place our bets as a country? What are our strengths, and what are we going to use them for? And where are we going to build the jobs, not just for the future, but right now? And he mentioned 2,000 jobs coming immediately as part of that green jobs revolution that he's looking at, and tens of thousands more to follow. So this agenda, and I think we have to be clear and value the green revolution. It's been talked about for decades, and now it's materializing. And I think it's quite right that the government and the Prime Minister look to own it and demonstrate, as we rebuild, actually build a better future post-COVID. We learn the lessons. We can build back greener and build back with new technologies. And I think the Prime Minister is absolutely timely in making this case for Britain. Okay, and the opportunity is there, not just for the country, but globally to lead the way. And I think that's what the Prime Minister is showing here.
OK, well, let's listen to what the Prime Minister said when he was talking about wind farms.
I can today announce that the UK government has decided to become the world leader in low-cost clean power generation, cheaper than coal, cheaper than gas. And we believe that in 10 years' time, offshore wind will be powering every home in the country, with our target rising from 30 gigawatts to 40 gigawatts. You heard me right. Your kettle, your washing machine, your cooker, your heating, your plug-in electric vehicle, the whole lot of them will get their juice cleanly and without guilt from the breezes that blow around these islands.
Sonia, you were a little scathing about it just before, but of course, in terms of jobs and in terms of investment and in terms of making the country greener, this is something that should be welcomed, is it not?
Well, of course. I mean, lots of people want to see a more green economy in 10 years' time, but the country's facing a big crisis at the moment. Economic forecasts are that between 1 million and 1.5 million people will be losing their jobs in the next few months. That's extra unemployed people on unemployment benefit. 20,000 jobs in the green industries in the next 2 years. That's all very well and good, but it will feel like a bit of a drop in the ocean to those people, particularly if they haven't got the right training or skills to go for one of those 20,000 jobs. We're talking, the Prime Minister announced £160 million investment in wind turbines. Again, that's all very well and good, but it's actually pretty incremental if you want every home in the UK to be sort of working off wind energy in a decade's time. So it's all good talk, but it really does feel like bluster and hot air at a time when people are scared about losing their jobs. This is a time when the country needs to hear from the Prime Minister and needs to hear a concrete, reassuring plan for the next few months about what the Prime Minister is going to do to protect jobs in the here and now. It's good to talk about the future. There's no point talking in abstract about the future in 10 years' time if you don't have anything to offer the people of this country now. And I'm afraid that it was just missing from the Prime Minister's speech. The government did take very significant economic action over the summer and earlier in the pandemic, but that is now all being withdrawn, and people are really scared and worried about losing their jobs. Businesses are worried about going bust, and this government has got very little to say to them right now.
OK, very briefly, Kulveer, I mean, in terms of that point and in terms of the Chancellor's very brief speech yesterday, is the government setting out in enough detail what economic plan it has, where this money is going to be coming from?
Yes, I think, look, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have been speaking almost daily, it felt, to the country about what they're doing to protect jobs. And as the Chancellor's been demonstrating with his interventions in the economy to help save businesses. So I think we can't say that they haven't been doing that. And I think they are looking at what they're going to be doing over the next few months as the pandemic is managed through the winter and the economy is helped. And jobs will be protected as best as they can. But as the Chancellor said, he can't protect all jobs. But I think the key here is that this is a speech as part of the Conservative Party conference. The whole country is hearing from the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, about what they're doing to help protect our health and the economy every day. This is a message and this is a speech about what the future holds. And I just want to say about talking about the future, 12 years ago, the then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and I worked on setting up the London Electric Vehicle Partnership to get electric vehicles into this country, to get charging networks built and so on and so forth. Those policies, that rhetoric, those messages delivered what we now see on the streets, not just in London, but across the UK. Politicians have a duty to set the vision of the future because it becomes the reality. And I think that's what Boris was doing today, as well as managing the here and now and giving reassurance to people that there is a better future ahead.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Kulveer Ranger and Sonia Sodha, thank you both so much for giving us your thoughts on Boris's speech.